Are you thinking about writing a book? Your magnum opus? Your great creative contribution to the world? Or do you have a friend who's writing a book, and you're secretly judging them as you sit in your bed at night thinking, ha, they're writing a book. Everyone writes books these days. It's taking them forever to write that thing. They'll never finish. I could write a book. I bet I could write a bestseller. It'd probably only take me a few months. I'm just sitting on a goldmine of untold stories. Spielberg wants to be me. But you've never even written more than a few tweets? Well, let me break your cynical little heart and tell you 5 myths about writing that you probably still believe. Myth number 1. Anyone can write a book. Ah, ooh, yes. That is actually true. Anyone can write a book, but most people won't. And there's a massive difference there. The ability to write a compelling novel is, I believe, definitely something we all possess as humans. But the immense discipline and willpower it takes to actually sit and make it happen is not something that everyone will do. Like all creative endeavors, some people are born with an innate talent for writing and the conventions of plot and story structure, and character and sentences and engaging audiences. And those things come so naturally to them that they never had to sit down and actually learn what makes a good story. They just know. I would argue that those people are few and far between, and if you're setting out to write a novel right now, it's probably best practice not to assume that you are one of those people. So, for the rest of us, we all can write a novel, but we have to be willing to put in the time. Not just learning the basics of storytelling and captivating an audience, but also the sheer grit and determination of actually sitting down and writing the novel, and going through the trial and error of applying your storytelling abilities to an actual story. It takes time. It's hard, but you can do it. Myth number 2. Your first book will be the one that gets you famous. Probably not true. I mean, I know it happens, and people see it happen every few decades, and hold it up as their one true goal, their writerly destiny to follow in the footsteps of those very rare writers. Very rare writers. But that is not realistic. The vast majority of writers have several books in their drawer before they write one that is successful. And even though when you're actually writing those novels that end up in the drawer, you think you're working on your magnum opus, and you're envisioning yourself on late night talk shows, talking about your novel. More than likely, in a few years, you will be able to see all the faults and flaws of that novel, and you'll grow as a writer. Your next book will be better. I think it's actually important to recognize this if you're serious about becoming a writer, because it can be tempting to get stuck revising your first novel over and over again until it's perfect and publishable and bestseller worthy. But when you do that, you're denying yourself the ability to learn from new story ideas. It could be that years from now, you recognize that your first story idea just wasn't rich enough or unique enough to be truly worthwhile. But you'll never learn that if you don't let yourself move on. But this is not the same as starting books, getting to the tricky middle, and then giving up to start a new book. That's actually a worse way to go about writing a book, because you have to complete the novel in order to grow. You have to power through the wonderful beginning, the terrible middle, and the lackluster end, so you can get it all down on paper and then scrutinize it to see what you have. Finally, after that, if the book is still struggling to find an audience or even come together as a story, then you move on, but not before. Myth number 3, there are no more original ideas. False. You can literally take any overused idea and make it new again simply by asking, what if? What if we create a zoo of genetically modified monsters? Well, that's just Jurassic Park. Well, what if instead of a zoo, we create smaller versions of dinosaurs for pets or home protection? Well, that's just something that already exists too. But just keep asking yourself, what if? Take story ideas that you love, and then ask yourself, what if, until you stumble upon something new. But you also don't need to rely on complicating known tropes to create originality. You only need to develop real people with real beliefs, put them in known situations with other real people with conflicting beliefs, and then bam, you have a story. Changing the theme of a known story can drastically alter the finished product. What if instead of examining the hubris of humanity in creating genetically modified dinosaurs, you decide to examine what would happen if humanity needed dinosaurs for some reason? Like if they were the only answer to some environmental catastrophe. Like maybe there's a global drought causing famine, and scientists discover that dinosaurs had something in their manure that would refertilize our soil and end the famine, so the only way humanity can survive is to recreate dinosaurs. You know, something like that. I don't know. But changing the theme changes the story, creates something new. Myth number 4. Best books don't need revision. They just pop out of the creative womb, fully formed, as flawless first drafts. Bah, no. That does not happen. Sometimes, if you're lucky, your first draft will contain that emotional essence of the final story. It'll hold the driving force from beginning to end, but it will still require structural repair. In the first draft, the characters might be mouthpieces for the idea rather than actual people, or the plot might move too forcefully at the author's hand rather than being propelled by the characters. or the description will be lacking, or the dialogue stilted, or any number of other structural building blocks that get corrected in revision. There really is no such thing as a perfect first draft. Most times, your first draft will be little more than an outline, either too sparse to be a complete story, or too bloated and meandering to hold anyone's interest. That's fine. That's perfect. The purpose of the first draft is to just get the ideas on paper, so you can see what you're working with. It's actually detrimental to your writing to believe that it's easier to work with ideas in your head rather than on paper, because the idea in your head is always a first draft until it's written on paper. No matter how many times you turn it over in your mind, until you write it down, you're still only working with a first draft. The bare bones of a story. You gotta write it, and then you gotta revise it. Myth number 5. Everyone is writing a book. But that is actually not true. A lot of people want to write a book. They may talk about writing a book. They think about writing a book. But are they actually sitting down to write the book? Are they studying story structure, and imagery, and foreshadowing, and character growth in order to create the most engaging story possible? Are they examining their own novels with a critical eye to remove cliches, redundancies, and derivative plotlines? If they are doing that, then yeah, they're writing a book. If not, then they're probably just occasionally thinking about writing a book. Maybe even dreaming about writing a book, but they aren't actually writing a book. I'm not saying all this to scare people away from writing books, from creating their one true masterpiece, because I really do believe that anyone can write a book. Writing can be taught. If you aren't born with the innate ability to hold an audience captive with your words, as most of us aren't, you can learn. Novel writing is a constant state of learning and revising, of trial and error. There is no perfect author out there. Even the bestsellers. They learn something new from every novel that they write, and every idea that they dream up. But you have to be willing to acknowledge that level of work, and you have to be willing to put in that level of work. Writing is hard. Like really, really hard. But you can do it. And the fact that anyone can write a novel doesn't cheapen writing at all. It actually makes it so much more rewarding to finish writing a novel, because you know you didn't just finish it because you were blessed at birth with some rare skill, but because you decided you wanted to write a book, and you were willing to go through the tremendously difficult task of learning how to write a book, and then actually making yourself sit down to write the book. That is a massive success, and it's one that anyone can aim for. You can write a book.